Hey, it's Benji Cole, son of Al Cole from CBS Radio and host of People of Distinction, the talk that gives an in-depth view of some of the most dynamic, intelligent, and successful people on the planet. Run to our website, peopleofdistinction.org for more info, or you can always email me directly at benji@alcoleenterprises.com. And on the line with us today, we have Richard Ruhling, MD. We're going to be discussing his amazing book, Mega Quake 2023, How 3 Timelines and 7 Events Signal Apocalyptic Times. Available for purchase through Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com. But people, listen, if you want to gather everything that Richard has in store, do yourself a favor and head directly to his personal site. And that's thebridegroomcomes.wordpress.com. There you'll find more information on Richard himself, more information on this fantastic narrative, as well as find hyperlinks set up to take you to the purchasing page. So one more time, that's thebridegroomcomes.wordpress.com. And I will say, Richard was brought to our network, People of Distinction, today by some of the best publishers in the business, people. Author Reputation Press. So if you or anybody you know have a book that they'd like moved, give yourself the best gift you could possibly give and move it through ARP. You can find out more information on them and their fantastic team at authorreputationpress.com. Richard, first and foremost, man, welcome to People of Distinction, and thank you very much for being a guest with us today. How you doing?
Oh, it's my privilege to be with you, Benji. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share, which I think your folk will enjoy.
Absolutely. Listen, I have no doubt whatsoever, Richard, what you're embarking upon is profound, as I was telling you in the pre-screening call, and it is an absolute pleasure to have you as a guest with us today. And I know we have a lot of information to cover, but before we go into the book, Richard, let's hold off slightly. Start by telling our listening audience a little bit more about yourself and your background, please.
Well, I wanted to be a missionary, and I wanted to be a medical missionary. I had always wanted to be like my dad, who was a doctor, and in giving my heart to Christ, I decided I would be, a doctor missionary. David Livingstone said God only had one son, made him a medical missionary. That's what David Livingstone was. After medicine, things didn't work out for the mission field, even though I went to take a year of public health, and the dean liked me. He encouraged me to take other training when the opportunity didn't work out to go to Africa, and he said, you can train other missionaries. So that appealed to me, and I took internal medicine and a year of cardiology, and I came back and taught at Loma Linda. It was in executive health, and I did yearly checkups for these executives and counsel them on their health. The dean came to me one day. He was shocked. He said, this is mid-70s, 1970s. They're starting to call medical care health care. Like, how could they do that? Great marketing tool for pharma. But really, doctors don't have much to say about health habits and what gives us an extra decade of life if we live well. And so I'm seeing health care as something we do for ourselves. It's not about seeing a doctor and getting a prescription. I'm 80, and I'm in excellent health, and I've only had one prescription in my lifetime since college, or when I changed my diet, and I've done it well. And so my book has a little on this, and with more opportunities, it does deal with the fact that the Biden administration has obscured some of the signs. I may explain this later, but I don't want to get into it. I don't want to get the cart before the horse. But anyway, in fact, my book has an excellent video link because Dr. Esselstyn of the Cleveland Clinic tells how you can reverse most diseases without prescription drugs, which are really a leading cause of illness and death today. People don't know it, but some of this COVID stuff is not the COVID, it's the shot, type of thing. But I don't want to go there right now. But anyway, so long story short, the book has some excellent information that the Biden administration gave $1 billion to promote the shot, so you can't say much online that is going the other way. But thank you for this interview and telling the truth, and we'll just go from that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that information, Richard. Guys, I told you, have your notebooks ready. We're getting ready to take this roller coaster ride through the book. Richard, let's jump right in, man. Your book, Mega Quake 2023, is a nonfiction book that talks about some serious calamities that are set to take place next spring. Now, I want to jump right in. First and foremost, Richard, what proof or evidence do you have for this allegation?
Very good. Thank you for the opportunity to answer, Benji. First of all, I have three areas that I think are credible. What is credible information? Well, since science and NASA put men on the moon, we worship science almost. Scientists can do anything we think. Well, they see a crescendo of events, increasing earthquake activity around the Pacific Ring of Fire, and they know trouble is coming. It's only a matter of when, but they don't know when. The science of seismology is young. We can't predict when. Scientists say it could be tomorrow. That was USA Today on the cover of my book. It says could be tomorrow. Well, an earthquake can happen any time, but the big one that's supposed to kick off the end times, God says He won't do anything without revealing it. So it is revealed, I believe, in Scripture, and we're going to take a look at that. To me, it's good to know that science has its limitations. A NASA space scientist couldn't tell or refute what an archaeologist, another branch of scientists, finds in the Holy Land that confirms Bible history, as being accurate, etc. So the Bible has good information, I think, and that brings me to my second source of information. It would be encouragement to your listeners, most of whom are Christian-oriented. I just Googled it, said 65 to 75% are Christians. Well, and the others are listening, may be sympathetic. If you can remember the number 45 and look up Isaiah 45, God named Isaiah 100 years before he was born and told how he would conquer Babylon, the strategy, because God arranged for the river Euphrates that was a moat around the city was diverted by Cyrus, and somebody left the gates open, and they just marched in at night and conquered the city without any loss of life. And when Cyrus, the king of Persia, saw that his strategy, that he would conquer, that the God of heaven of Israel gave him his name and told him how it would happen 100 years before he was born, he praised the God of Israel, and he freed them to go back to their Holy Land. And he even paid the way for them to go. So that's huge evidence, that these writings, when Daniel marches in and shows him shortly after, these are in ancient writings from Jerusalem. Wow. Cyrus was impressed, and we should be too, I think. But that's just an example.
Absolutely. Love it.
When Christ was asked about the end of the world, and you alluded to this in your intro, what's the sign of the end of the world? This is Matthew 24, verse 3. He says in verse 15 to understand the book of Daniel. And the book of Daniel, which 8th chapter, is what he was referring to, and it is a conflict between a ram and a goat. It's political cartoons, just like we use an eagle, or when I grew up, it was a bear with Russia, still maybe some people know that the Russia is the bear. Well, and we find these cartoons in the Bible, of all things. In Daniel's 7th chapter, there is a lion with eagle's wings. And if you know the UK, their moniker is a lion, and we got eagle's wings. We're allied with them. But then comes a bear, a Russia, type of thing. And so the Bible is up to date. In verse 17 of Daniel 7, it says that these 4 beasts are 4 kings that shall arise out of the earth. And so, I believe that, and some people wonder, is Russia going to get us? Well, they got nukes taking ship to Nicaragua, and it's worse than the Cuban Missile Crisis that was some years back. I think that if we understand that God disciplined Egypt like He's going to do for America, because we are like Egypt in many ways. Egypt enslaved Israelites, but we've enslaved most people in substances like alcohol, tobacco, even drugs, even medical care is a form of bondage in some sense. And we have many negative lifestyles, and Egypt threw babies in the river, if we remember, but we've thrown 63 million in the trash. Worse than Egypt, and supposedly a Christian nation. And God is going to discipline us just like he did Egypt. God, he said he would execute judgment, and he took Israel to a covenant that he regarded as marriage, and made them also a kingdom. He says, if you keep my covenant, you'll be a kingdom. But he later said in Jeremiah 3:14, return to me, I'm married to you. He regarded the covenant they made as a marriage relationship. And the good news that I've got is we can be his kingdom, and we can be married to the bridegroom. That's how we get into the marriage. But we have to be ready for the events and understand them, because it's going to be big trouble with what comes, basically, with this earthquake, in my opinion.
Next question I'd love to get into, man, is you say the earthquake is encoded 4 ways. Please tell us how. Talk to us a little bit more about what you mean by that.
Okay, good question. And on the very first page of Revelation, the last book in the Bible, and one of my favorite authors says all the books of the Bible meet and end in the Revelation. And so there are concepts like the Lamb, slain in the Jewish sacrifices, but Christ was the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. He agreed to die for us, type of thing. But on the first page of Revelation, in verse 10, chapter 1, Revelation 1:10 says, I am Alpha and Omega, the first and the last. Now, Christ is also the Word, and if you go to where a word is first found, it often has a meaning or context for the last time, Alpha and Omega, first and last, because, and specifically, when John heard a great voice as of a trumpet saying, I am Alpha and Omega, go to where you first find trumpet in the Bible. And it just happens to be Exodus 19 at Mount Sinai. God took Israel to Mount Sinai, and he came down on the mountain, if you ever saw the movie Ten Commandments, and it was confrontation with God and his law. Basically, people were afraid, and the mountain shook. This was earthquake, mini earthquake in that context. People were afraid, fear God, give glory to him, time of judgment. Basically, it was a mini judgment day as they saw the law. Well, I think we're coming to Maxi Judgment Day, and it's not just Egypt or Sinai. It's going to be the whole world shaking because of the fourfold. This is just one place. This is the first place we find the earthquake encoded as the great voice of a trumpet. John was startled. He turned to look, and it goes on to reveal something about it. The second place that we find earthquake encoded is also in that first chapter. It said that when John had a vision, one like the Son of Man, it says the voice was as the voice of many waters. Well, in that context, John was called to be a prophet. Up until then, he was just the apostle. But now he was called to reveal the future, the end-time apocalypse. And it says, write what you saw, which was past, write what is, and write what is to come. So what's coming is prophecy, and John was called to be the prophet at that point. And my point is that the sound of many waters also is the context of Isaiah's call to be a prophet. When in Isaiah 6, it says in verse 4, the posts of the door moved at the voice of him that cried, and the house was filled with smoke. I think the house was filled with smoke because the censer tipped over, and the posts moving, clearly it was an earthquake. Zechariah 14:5 says, you'll flee as you fled from before the earthquake in the days of Uzziah. And Uzziah was the king in Isaiah 6, verse 1. In the year that Uzziah died, I saw the Lord. So it was the call of Isaiah to be a prophet. And the verse right before Isaiah 6 is the lions roaring and the sea roaring. And so those are encoding, a way of encoding the earthquake with, so that's the second. And I believe if we are really seeking God, there will be some people called with this earthquake if we are watching. In the wedding parable of Luke 12:36, it says, be ready when I come and knock, that when I knock, that you open immediately. Blessed is that servant whom his Lord finds watching. He will gird himself, make him sit down to eat, and serve him. Well, the point is that watching is a difficult word. It comes from Gregorio in Greek, meaning be awake. and we can't be awake every night. It wouldn't be fair for Christ to ask us to be awake every night. But Passover was the only night in the year that they were. It was commanded, and the clues point to Passover. In that Luke's parable, there is triple Passover imagery mentioning the word watch is a clue, but it also says have your loins girded. And by the way, I mentioned the rule of first use that scholars use. Loins girded is also found in Passover context in Exodus 12, verse 11. Israelites had their loins girded, ready to leave Egypt. They were ready. And we need to be ready. It's not just go to sleep and he's going to rapture me anytime. It's not about rapture, etc. Zap to heaven. I don't think so. In Revelation 3:17, it says, "You're wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked." Well, why would God want to rapture that group to heaven? We might start trouble all over again in heaven if we. I think we have some growing to do, basically. And so anyway, that's an example of how when I come and knock, the church where he knocked anciently in Laodicea, Greece, ended in an earthquake. So the knock is an encoded earthquake as well as the lion's roar, as well as the trumpet. And so it just those are ways that you can know that this is going to be one big event, because it brought the church of Laodicea, that lukewarm church where Christ was outside knocking at the door, it brought that church to an end. The city was destroyed. Mm-hmm. So I think we're facing big stuff.
Absolutely. Richard, I want to talk about your subtitle for a second as we start to close out of this wonderful interview, and thank you so much for the information that you've relayed so far. Now, your subtitle is How 3 Timelines and 7 Events Signal Apocalyptic Times. Talk to us a little bit more about that subtitle and really what you mean by it.
Good. Thank you for the opportunity. We already mentioned how that America is like Egypt in many ways, enslaving people, throwing their babies in the river. We've aborted so many, negative lifestyles, and God freed Israel from Egypt, actually in what would be called a Jubilee event. In Leviticus 25th chapter, where it talks about Jubilee, the slaves were freed, and they had a promise of land. Land was restored. In Israel's day, they could not sell their children's inheritance forever. On a Jubilee year, it came back to family ownership. So they could rent the land out, lease it, so to speak. Somebody else could earn the money from the crops. Maybe the guy owes the money, and he lets them take it till Jubilee. But the point is, the Jubilee came on 50. And from Roe v. Wade, 50 years is next year. That's one timeline. Wow, how did that happen? But it is. And that's just one timeline. I earlier mentioned how that when Christ was asked about the end of the world, and I got sidetracked really, about he mentioned to understand the book of Daniel, and the 8th chapter has a political cartoon of a ram and a goat. And it says in the verse 20 of Daniel 8 that the horns on the ram are the kings of Media and Persia. Well, today we would say Iraq and Iran. And for anybody that doesn't believe the Bible, they say, oh, Daniel was written after the fact, and he just filled in to make the thing sound good. Well, how would they fill it in 2,000 years and end up with Iraq and Iran as the focus right now? And we already did. We broke the horn of Iraq. Saddam is gone. He is the king represented by one horn, and the next one will be Iran. I would bet every dollar I had on it, but the question is, we don't want war with Iran. It was bad to go against Iraq. No weapons of mass destruction, and we left men over there and equipment over there, and bad situation. Biden withdrew, leave a bad taste for lots of people. Don't want to go into politics, but anyway. The point is that we should wonder what makes us go to war against Iran. And a different part of the Bible, Zechariah 14, it's the next to the last book in the Old Testament. It's Zechariah, Malachi, and then comes Matthew. And Zechariah, the last chapter, 14, says, the day of the Lord comes, and nations will be gathered against Jerusalem to battle. The houses will be rifled, the women ravished. Half the city will go into captivity. Then the Lord is going to go forth and fight against them. And the point is that he will use the goat to do that. The goat flies from the west. And by the way, this will blow some people's minds, I know. But anyway, The horns represented was militant. Animals fight with their horns, okay, and the horns of the ram get broken. But historically, going back, as it says, God declares the end from the beginning. If you go to the book of beginnings, Genesis 22, there was another ram, and Abraham was asked to sacrifice his son Isaac, but he was spared by the ram that was caught in a bush, okay, by his horns. And the point is that George Bush caught the first horn, okay? Isn't that one? How did God do that? And then you come to the second horn, a great horn. In the Bible times, horns were cut off to make trumpets. Could we see a great trump, which makes the goat great? It says in Daniel 8:8, after the ram's horn were broken, the goat becomes great. And wow, part of Trump's political stuff, and I don't agree with everything that Trump has done, but I think it's very interesting. I'm not political per se, but both George Bush by the ram caught in the bush, and here's a trumpet. If they cut off horns to blow through, and a great horn conquers the ram, I think it's amazing that God could pick that kind of imagery to tell the future. And the point is, though, that this is just one way that it's going to happen, because when Muslims take the city of Jerusalem, they happen to have a mosque there. And the mosque has an inscription which says, Allah has no son. Hello? Suddenly, when they're rejoicing in their mosque, it says, the Lord will roar from Jerusalem, the heavens and earth will shake. And that's one big earthquake. I believe that earthquake is what initiates end times. And the Muslims trigger it with their celebration about Allah having no son. And I believe that earthquake will affect the whole world. Everybody will know time of judgment from that. Yeah, so thank you for letting me fill in a few blanks. And maybe you have another question or whatever.
Richard, last question here, man, because, listen, guys, I told you already. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and his personal website, thebridegroomcomes.wordpress.com, are the places you have to go. There's no getting around it. You want to gather all of the information, pick up your copy so you can learn directly from him. The last question here, though, Richard, listen, you sent me a lot of credible sources and a lot of information, one of which mentions Ellen White. Tell us a little bit about who she was and that information that you sent.
Okay, thank you. Ellen White, Paul Harvey eulogized her one time as a woman of distinction because she wrote more than any other woman in history and was published more than any other Western author, okay? One of her books is published in over 150 languages. She wrote on health extensively, and NIH gave my school $40 million to find out why Seventh-day Adventists, and I'm not promoting any religion. I'm no longer a member. I think they made some bad choices and mistakes, so this is not about church-going per se. But Ellen White shines, in my opinion, because she wrote so accurately on health. She had an injury in childhood, couldn't go beyond the third grade, but she wrote so accurately and she said in 1864, 100 years before the Surgeon General came along, she said tobacco is a malignant poison, and at a time when doctors were prescribing smoking to deal with tuberculosis. They recommended smoking. Today we know that doesn't work for tuberculosis, but so 100 years later, the Surgeon General was able to make her malignant poison linked to malignant tumors of the lung. Very accurate. And she also said drugs do not cure disease. They change the form and location. Today, adverse drug reactions are a leading cause of death. I have a website, leading cause of death, prescriptiondrugs.com. And in fact, I could even tell you, shockingly, my wife, former wife, got a bladder infection, went to her doctor. I was retired, and got an antibiotic, and it cured her infection in a couple, 3 days, really. But months later, she had a rash. I said, you better see your doctor. And he did a blood test, called urgently the next morning, referring her to a hematologist. She didn't have any platelets in her blood. He did a bone marrow exam in the hospital. No platelets there. Took a spleen out, a splenectomy. Oops, still didn't help. Treated her with high steroids, gamma globulin, transfusions. She died of a stroke. We think those numbers always apply to somebody else. Well, that message had my name on it, and I'm passing it on to public because I'm well credentialed. I discovered that the antibiotic she took, Cipro, does cause platelet disorders. It was listed in the physician's desk reference, and so wow, it's wider than we know, and slippery slope if you're taking pharma, in my opinion. And I have good news in my book. I have a link at the end of the book to a website where people can watch a video with Dr. Esselstyn of the Cleveland Clinic telling how most people could reverse their disease without prescription drugs by eating. Hippocrates, father of medicine, said, let your food be your medicine. I'm doing it. I'm doing it well, and I'm 80 and in great health, and I'm not looking for any Medicare, Medi-Cal, whatever help to treat me. Basically that's it. So thank you very much for the opportunity to explain a background. Oh, Ellen White shines from my perspective, and she did not want drugs taught at her medical school. They hijacked her school to teach pharmacology and get AMA accreditation. Bad decision, in my opinion. I wish now, in retrospect, I'd been taught natural remedies, not drugs. And she later, after they took her school, and she didn't want drugs taught, but she had a vision of an earthquake at Loma Linda. Buildings, great and small, were falling to the ground. Many lives were blotted out, and it seemed the judgment day had come. And she linked it to the day of the Lord by quoting Zephaniah 1:8. Verse 7 is the day of the Lord. I believe that, and interestingly enough, you asked me on the timelines, and I got to tie this in. The book of Joel has more references to the day of the Lord than any other book, and it comes in the context of 4 generations. It says, you tell your children, let them tell their children, and them another generation. That's 4 generations. You, your children, their children, and another. And the Bible generation is 40 years. It says in Hebrews 3:9 and 10, God bore the rebellious generation 40 years in the wilderness. So 4 times 40 is 160. Now, I'm saying, based on Roe v. Wade in 50 years, that next year is it, 2023. If you think of the 4 generations and you go back 40 years times 4 is 160. And it's 1863. That's when Lincoln gave his Emancipation Proclamation that went into effect. Freed the slaves. And we love America for its freedom, but my point is that in Joel 1, verse 3 and 4, after the 4 generations of people, there is cankerworm, palmerworm, locust, and caterpillar. And what each insect eats and leaves a little bit, the next insect eats and leaves until nothing is left after the caterpillar. And the point is that after our freedoms are gone for 4 generations, I think we will have a big event, martial law, no freedom, and probably racial strife, which is on the rise because some are fomenting it, unfortunately. I believe we're all made in God's image, and color is only skin deep. I like Ben Carson, and I believe that people can do well, but let's not blame the other guys and try to put them down, basically. And so that's just my perspective. But the 4 generations from Lincoln's time points to next year. And by coincidence, incidentally, the Seventh-day Adventist Church also was formed and organized in 1863. I believe it's over for them as well. That earthquake will they have 7 hospitals in Loma Linda. Veterans isn't theirs really, but why do we? If we taught health right, we wouldn't need. The more drugs we use, the more hospitals we need. Basically, because of the adverse effects. If we taught people how to live well, don't need that. I'm not going to the hospital. I'd rather die at home. Safer. No infectious processes are going on either. Basically.
There you have it. Well, listen, Richard. The easy answer to that is. Well, there's no money in those other ways, right? So, I mean, the medication can be a temporary Band-Aid, but yes, would lead to other complications, but that just leads to more money for the pharmaceutical and the medical industry, and that's another discussion. We don't need to go there. Richard, this has been fantastic, man. People, if this hasn't moved you, pinch yourself. I don't know what's going on, okay? I'm going to say it for you once more. I know I don't have to, but I'm just going to re-impress it for you one last time. We're here on the line with Richard Ruhling, M.D. We just finished discussing his amazing book, Mega Quake 2023, How 3 Timelines and 7 Events Signal Apocalyptic Times. Available for purchase through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or directly through his site, thebridegroomcomes.wordpress.com. Head on over there today and pick up your copy. You surely will not be disappointed. A wonderful journey for you to embark upon, an even better gift for you to get for someone else too. So you know where to go to pick up your copies. Richard, this has been an absolute pleasure. Such an honor. I truly mean that. Thank you once again for being a guest on People of Distinction.
Hey, my privilege. God bless you, Benji. Thank you.